Hey there, YouTubers. Kitten Hoarder here, and you're watching Session Report, the show that takes you to the gamer's table to share in the surprises that come out during play. And today we are going to be playing Spirit Island, which, if you have not played Spirit Island before, has a very interesting theme. So, the theme of Spirit Island, as we can kind of see from this box, is it's basically a European-style game of resource management and planning and strategy, where a group of European explorers have discovered an island that's mostly uninhabited. Let me show you what the island might look like. For instance, here's what the island might look like for this one-player version of the game. And as you can see, just like in Settlers of Catan, there's different styles of land. There's marshes, and there's jungles, and there's mountains, and there's sand, deserts. And every turn, new explorers are going to appear on the island, and they are going to try to build towns and cities and exploit the resources of the island. And so far, every Euro in the book. But the big difference here, what makes this game very exciting from a thematic standpoint, is that you do not play as the European settlers. You do not even play as the natives of the island fighting back against the European settlers, because the natives are actually, they would rather just keep to themselves. They don't realize what a menace these settlers are. You play as the spirits of nature protecting this island. And you're not trying to explore, expand, exploit, all of those things that you might do in a typical strategy game. You are trying to beat back the invaders. That's the game term for them. You're trying to beat back the invaders and convince them to leave the island for good. And you can do that by maybe destroying all of them, or maybe just scaring them enough that they never want to come back. It's a very fascinating game design, and actually just that idea itself is not, it's terribly groundbreaking, but when you see all of the intricacies of this game, it's really fantastic. So I really look forward to showing you this one. It's one I was definitely on the fence about for quite a while, because it is made, if I can see here somewhere on the box, by Greater Than Games, who are mainly known for Sentinels of the Multiverse, which is not really known as an incredibly deeply, intricately designed game that's well balanced and plays very well solo and all sorts of things like that. Sentinels of the Multiverse is known as a very fiddly game that can be incredibly thematic, but not really what you call like a deep, elegant strategy game. I should have gotten this game a lot sooner, because Spirits of the Island, or Spirit Island, is all of that. It's a very thematic experience, but it's also a deep, elegant strategy game. Plays very well solo. So why don't I just show you what it's all about? So let's start with setup, and I'll explain kind of the rules and the goals as I go along. Okay, so at the beginning of the game, you're going to pick one of these 4 island boards at random. If you're playing a 2-player game, you're going to put 2 of the island boards together, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle like that. If you're playing a 3-player game, you might put 3 segments of the island together in some other way that I can't quite remember off the top of my head, maybe something like this. I'm pretty sure that's not it. You put them together in a way that you've basically got one contiguous, this is definitely it, yeah. So for a 3-player game, you build an island board like this. For a 4-player game, you use all 4 pieces. But for a solo game, you're going to just use 1 island board, and trust me, it seems rather small, it seems pretty confined. You're going to be happy for that, because there's a lot to think about in this game. So the first thing we're going to do is randomly pick an island board. I already picked this one at the beginning of the game. And then we're going to set up this board according to some of the symbols on here. So I can see that there's these numbered spaces here, 1 through 8. They each have a different land type as well. And during the initial setup of the game, they each have different things that go out on them. For instance, These are the Dahan or Dahan. I'm kind of go back and forth between how I think it should be pronounced. These are the natives of the island. You can see they're these little wooden huts, kind of look like mushrooms. So I'm going to put 2 out there, 1 out here, 1 here, and 2 over here. Now, over the course of the game, the Dahan don't really do much actively, but they will be first threatened by the invaders, and then if they survive the attacks by the invaders, they will fight back. So really, for the most of the game, unless you have a card that tells you otherwise, which I'll show you that in a minute. There's a ton of different cards that do all sorts of things. Unless you have a card that tells you otherwise, the invaders only attack when they've been attacked. They only attack in self-defense. So we're going to put those out. And then we've got a little city here, and we've got a blight token here. So let me kind of zoom in on these symbols a little bit. Right, so we've got the little huts for the Dahan, and then we've got a city. You can tell it's a city because it's got 3 little things. We're going to put 1 there. We've got a town, which we're going to put down here because it's got 2 little buildings, and we've got a blight token. So we're going to put this blight token out. Now, I kept these in the bag because over the course of the game, you're only using a specific number of blight tokens. So you should, when doing setup, you should use blight tokens from the game box. And then I will put out 1 or 2 more blight tokens when setting up the game, and then that's basically going to be it for the course of the game. As I add or remove blight tokens, they don't go back in the box or back in the general pool. They go into a smaller pool that's all I'm going to use. So the next step would be then to create the my spirit. So let's choose a spirit. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video that you play as the spirits of the island, and these spirits don't have, you know, names like we would. Instead, they have these little phrases, which is, I mean, it doesn't really affect the gameplay very much, but it's a kind of a fascinating little aspect of the theming of this game. So for instance, we could be shadows flicker like flame, and this is the spirit that represents the fear that you get when the very end of sunset, the shadows in the island start to flicker like the shadows on the edge of a fire. You could be vital strength of the earth, which represents the slow sort of defensive and I guess replenishing abilities of the earth itself. We could be lightning swift strike, which represents, well, you know, the storm and the intensity and ferocity of the storm. We could be river surges in sunlight, which represents, this one's got a really cool backstory. Normally the rivers on the island flood during the rainy season, like most rivers, but there's one particular river that floods during the sunny season, the warm season, because there's, I guess, like a glacier way up in the mountains that begins to thaw and melt when it's very, very warm, and it feeds into this one particular river, and that river floods at that one particular time. So this spirit represents that sort of, I guess, the healing properties and the cleansing properties of that that time. But there's I believe 8 different spirits that you can get in the base game. There's more in different expansions, but we are going to be playing today with a spread of rampant green. So, you always look at the spirit's backside, and you can see the spirit's backstory, and then you can also see setup for the spirit. At the beginning of the game, we're going to pick a color of tokens to use for this spirit. He is a spread of rampant green, so I would choose green if I had one, but I don't have green tokens. I think I'm going to go ahead and use what's going to stand out the best here. I think I'm going to go ahead and use blue tokens for a spread of rampant green. So let's read the backstory. One of the older spirits on the island, though it's even more wild and exuberant these days than when it was young. Contrary to some stories, it does think things through. It's just far more concerned with the process of life than with things like consequences. It's not friendly to the Dahan, but its idea of a good time is to smother their buildings in all manner of inconvenient greenery, and its notion of help transforms carefully cultivated areas into overgrown thickets. I think I said friendly. It's not unfriendly to the Dahan. Entire villages have been known to move to fresh planting sites years early if a spirit speaker suspects that rampant green is going to stay in the area for too long. So we are a spread of rampant green, and in the setup it says put 2 of your presence tokens. I think I changed my mind. I think I'm going to be yellow for spread of rampant green. Yellow, perhaps like wildflowers. I'm going to put 2 of the presence tokens on the 1 in the highest numbered wetland and 1 in the jungle without any Dahan. So the highest numbered wetland, that would be this number 3 here. You can see there's a number 1 here, a number 3 here. So you can see even this setup is sort of randomized in a fun, different way. And 1 in the jungle without any Dahan, that would be this jungle down here, number 6. Then it got some playstyle. I tend to ignore that for the first game. It's a bit of a handicap to me, but I like to get into it fresh, with fresh eyes. And this is my first time playing this spirit. So we're going to flip it on over, and we put the rest of the tokens out on these dashed circles here on my player board. And as I put out more presence over the course of the game, and the presence is going to allow me to affect different parts of the island. Most cards that you can play only affect the areas closest to where you have presence. So for instance, if I want to affect this area over here, I would need a card that has a range 2, or I need to put a presence somewhere close by it. So as I continue to put out presence, not only am I going to get that benefit, but I'm also going to get the benefit of what's underneath these circles. And underneath these circles is basically the amount of energy that I gain per turn, which is going to allow me to play cards, and the amount of cards I can play per turn. So I start out gaining 0 energy every turn and being able to play 1 card. As I continue the game, I'm definitely going to want to uncover those so I can play more cards and have the energy required to pay for those cards. I'm also going to take these 3 tokens. These are used when I use special abilities that I'm going to need to remember later on in the turn. So they're basically just generic markers that I can use for things I'm going to need to remember. So that's basically set up for my spirit. And now we're going to set up the invader board, which is going to go over to the left side here of the playing area. So I should mention before we continue with the setup that setup might be slightly different if you use one of these various invaders, named invaders basically. So we can, in the base game, we can play with the Kingdom of Brandenburg, Prussia, the Kingdom of England, or the Kingdom of Sweden. And those change the rules slightly and make the game more difficult, and they might change setup a little bit too. We also could play with various scenarios: Dahan Insurrection, Rituals of Terror, Guard the Isle's Heart, or Blitz, which is a faster game. We're not going to play with any of those yet because, for one thing, I haven't really worn out the welcome, or the base game itself has not worn out its welcome for me. I still am quite enjoying playing just the regular vanilla game. And also, I would like to win the game. I'm a little selfish that way. So I want to give myself the biggest chance of winning the game, or at least not losing too quickly. So I'm just going to be playing just the regular vanilla game. So how do we set up this board here? Well, there's a few things we have to do. First, we have to create the invader deck, which is going to go face down on this explore area. We're also going to randomly choose a blight card to put it here, and we're going to create the fear deck, which is going to go up here. So let me grab those cards, and then I'll show you how those things work. So let's start by putting out the blight card. Now, in the base game, you only have 2 to choose from. They both look identical on the back, but they will have different fronts. So we're just going to randomly pick one here, like so. I'll put the other one aside because there's no use putting a single card back in the box, in my opinion. Now we're going to create the Explorer deck. Oh, and the Blight card starts with some Blight already on it. So I'm going to put 2 Blights per player. Well, there's only 1 player. We're going to put 2 Blights on this card. If there are ever no Blights on the card, I have to flip it. Now, this could happen sooner or later depending on if my spirit has any way to get rid of Blights that are already in play. It could happen very quickly if my spirit can't do that and can't prevent Blights from getting out. Once this flips, more bad things happen. Every round, at the beginning of the invader's turn, when they get their actions, something else bad will happen to me. So I really want to try to avoid that. The next thing I'm going to do is create the Invader deck. And this is basically level 1, 2, and 3 cards, and I'm just going to shuffle them all together. And basically the way it works in the base game, unless you're playing with a specific invader or a specific scenario that tells you to make the deck differently, it's basically one fewer card than you have of each number. So I'm going to shuffle them all together and then sort them into piles. I think this is the easiest thing to do rather than shuffling 4 cards together, which is kind of a hassle. I'm just going to shuffle everything up like this. And then I'm going to separate it into 4 piles, and I'm just going to remove the first card from each pile. So, 3 piles, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to take these 3 cards away. And again, it's no use putting 3 small cards back in the box. I'm just going to put them up there. And this is my Invader deck now. So I'm going to put that there. And then at the very last step of setup, there's going to be a new Invader exploring the island. But we'll do that in a second. Next thing I'm going to do is create the Fear deck. And this one's really easy. I just shuffle all the Fear cards together. And then I'm going to basically deal out 9 Fear cards. Now I mentioned that one of the goals of the game, either we're going to try and destroy all of the invaders, which you could possibly do, depending on which spirit you pick. Maybe you have a spirit who's really good at quickly destroying things. But more likely, you're going to first frighten them a little bit. Because the more frightened they are, the easier it is to convince them to leave. First, you have to destroy everything at the beginning of the game. In the first few rounds of the game, you can only convince them to leave if you've destroyed every single invader. But later on in the game, your victory conditions might change as we go through these various terror levels. So we start at terror level 1, and you can see here I need to destroy all of the explorers, all of the towns, and all of the cities. But as soon as I reach terror level 2, I only need to destroy the towns and cities. And as soon as I reach terror level 3, I only need to destroy the cities. And if I get to the very bottom of the Fear deck, if I go through all 9 cards and reveal this victory condition, that means I've scared them so much that they will just leave. I don't need to destroy anybody else. So fear is really the name of the game. We need to strike fear in the hearts of these invaders and convince them that it's just not worth it. It's not worth coming to this island where all sorts of terrifying things are happening, just like on Lost. And it's not worth going through 6 or 7 seasons of completely ludicrous plot twists. Sorry, I've gotten myself mixed up. It's not worth basically angering the spirits of the earth and angering the spirits of the Dahan. It's better to just stay in Europe, basically, you know? So I basically created this deck. I dealt out 3 piles of 3 cards each, and I put the different terror levels in between the middle decks, basically. So I got 3 cards, terror level 2, 3 more cards, terror level 3, 3 more cards, and the victory condition. And these cards I will go ahead and put back in the box in a second. And finally, we're going to take our major and minor powers and just sort of shuffle them all up. And those are going to be some of the cards we're going to play with over the course of the game. And I will explain how those work in a little bit, but basically these are the abilities that I'm going to have available to me. I start out with some powers, but I'm going to gain more powers over the course of the game. Major powers and minor powers. Major powers are a little stronger, but they come at a greater cost. And minor powers are a little bit weaker, but more plentiful. So I'm just going to shuffle up these decks completely and put them off to the side of the board for now. So, just like that. And then finally, I'm going to take 4 fear tokens per player and put them up here in the fear pool. As I generate fear, as I scare the invaders, I'm going to move fear tokens down into the generated fear pool. As soon as I get all the fear tokens down there, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to earn a fear card, and we're going to move these all back up. Actually, it's only one thing, I guess. But that can have multiple effects, because the fear cards are then going to take effect in a future round, which is one nice thing, and it's going to move me ever closer to increasing the terror level and earning victory from that. So I think of this one more good shuffle, and we'll also do the same thing with the minor powers. So I'll do that in a second off camera. But lastly, I want to show you, I'm doing this setup all completely out of order, and that's okay. There's different order in the book, but I like to do things in the order of when do I get the components out of the box. So this is the way I'm doing it. The last step to setting up my spirit is to grab the 4 unique starting cards for my spirit. And you can see that every spirit has unique starting cards. So I grab the 4 unique to my spirit, and those are going to create my starting hand. So I'm just going to set them off here. We'll look at them later. So that's basically the last thing. So and now I just got to get these cards a little straightened out and put everything back in the box, and then we're basically ready to start. With one exception, we need to do the first explore phase. As I mentioned, there's one more step to setting up the game of Spirit Island, and that is the initial exploration. The invaders are going to show up. They've already built a city and a town, but some more explorers are going to show up, hoping to expand their, stronghold, expand their hold on this island. So we're going to flip over the top card, and they're going to explore into the wetlands. Now, the way this works is when an exploration occurs, you place explorers, which are these sort of conquistador-looking figures, like that. You place an explorer in every matching terrain, in this case wetlands, if it's adjacent to the ocean, if it's on the coast, which both wetlands currently are, or if it's adjacent to a terrain that already includes an invader figure, or if that terrain already includes an invader figure. So basically, if it's 0 or 1 spaces away from an invader figure, or 1 space away from the coast, you're going to place an explorer out. It's always set up at the beginning of the game so that there's going to be somebody put out on every space. But if I can strategically kind of hem them in, then they might be able to not explore as much later in the game. So we're going to start by putting an explorer on number 1 and number 3, which are both wetland spaces. Then we're going to move that card over to the build. Now next round, in the wetland spaces where they've just explored, they're going to build. They're going to build a town, or if there's already a town there, they're going to build a city. And they'll keep building towns and cities, basically, until I destroy them all. And then, the round after that, they're going to ravage in the wetlands. And those towns and cities and explorers are going to use their strength, combine their strength, to attack any Dahan that are there, or to attack the land itself. And that's something that I want to avoid. So really, I want to try to either destroy these guys before they can build anything, which would be fantastic, but there's a little wrinkle to that I'll explain later. Or I want to try to at least destroy them before they can attack the land, or maybe defend the land in some way, or move them to another space before they can attack. There's a lot of different things I can do to prevent them from damaging the land. But damaging the land would be really bad because it can result in these blight tokens being put out on the board. And as I mentioned before, as soon as these last 2 blight tokens are out, the card's going to flip over and more bad things are going to start happening every round. So I want to try to delay that as if I can. But that's basically the overview of the game. Let's get into the first round, and I'll explain the rules as we go. So this video is going to cover just the setup of the game and kind of the broad overview. And now I'm going to get into the more nitty-gritty of the mechanics, how a round works, how a turn works. And we'll play out maybe the first turn, that'll be the next video, and then we'll go from there. So I'll see you on the other side.